When I was a social work student at Waite, as it then was, I had two major placements. One in end of second year, one at the beginning of end of fourth year, as it was timed back then. They do it differently now. My first placement was at Fremantle Community Welfare, as it then was, now called Department of Community Development. And the second one was actually at the Trades and Labour Council. I was the first social work student to go on placement with the union movement. And both of them were essentially community development projects. One was in Cooke, trying to get together a youth club down in Cooke, which was a bit of a hard case in those days. That was 1974, 75. And then in the TLC it was largely community development work, some policy work, but largely community development, like creating the Pensioners Action Group or facilitating the Pensioners Action Group, setting up what became known as the Social Security Union with others, and that now has sort of morphed itself into what's called the Welfare Rights and Advocacy Service, which is a community-based community legal centre. I'm the chair of the committee still of what became an established agency out of a volunteer community development exercise. So there you go, late 70s. At that point there wasn't a great deal. There were caseworkers or agency workers who were entitled at least community liaison officers and things of that sort. But there wasn't a great deal of emphasis on community work as a way of getting things done. Well, I mentioned Peter Kenyon, he's still around. Yeah. Ian's now the director of Anglicare. One of the key people was Dave Buchanan, who's a staff member here at Curtin at the social work department. He was very, very active. There were a lot of sort of broader sort of ways of getting things done back then. One of them was called the Social Action Lobby, believe it or not. Interesting, because it's a bit of an aside because it wasn't really community work. But the people who were active in that were focused upon different ways of getting things done, and community work became one of those. But the Social Action Lobby was actually just a vehicle by which government employed helping professions were able to speak through an independent body. They were at risk if they spoke out in their own name or went public over particular issues. So they used to coalesce into this Social Action Lobby, and that way they'd appoint someone, they'd provide the information but wouldn't put themselves at risk. So there was a sort of an independent spokes group on behalf of some of the social issues of the time. So, you know, that was another resource building type of activity that took place back in the 70s. Oh, it was all volunteer effort, yeah. All volunteer effort. It was not, again, the trade union movement back then was a very solid source of support. We met in the Trades Hall in Beaufort Street, now the Labour Centre. As incidentally was the Social Security Union, that was financed and supported by the Trades and Labour Council as well, as was the Pensioners Action Group. The union movement offered resources, in-kind support, rooms and offices and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. It was still fairly early on. It wasn't really until the 80s that the community work sort of focus really started to shift. And at that stage, that was largely driven out of community enterprise type activity here in Western Australia, with emphasis out of the Department of Employment and Training under Peter Dowding, who was the Minister for Employment and Training, and people like Peter Kenyon and others. Ian Carter, who's now with Anglicare, were both staunch advocates of community enterprise. And so what we now today call social capital or community capital expansion or capacity building was really a feature of the 1980s in WA. So I was there in 75, 76, so it was a bit earlier on. So there weren't that many people working in that sort of field.